Hey, it's Dr. A. I did a companion video, which we'll link below, about COVID, post-COVID infection, and your immune response post-COVID infection based on the current data that we have. And in that, I had mentioned that I did another video, which is this one, where I talk a little bit more deeply about the two sides of specific immunity that I mentioned briefly in that particular video. Now, I want to get into it, just take a few minutes to go into this, but I think it's worth doing because beyond COVID, you might be listening in the future and thinking, oh, COVID, well, a long time ago. This still applies for every other, pretty much every other immune response that you have. And so this is just a way to kind of talk about the idea of immunity, how we have layers of immunity, how we have a memory immunity that can rise back up, and if we've seen the infection before, it can keep us from getting sick with it or shorten the illness, etc. And it is a really well-oiled, well-orchestrated sort of machine, our immune system. So we want to think about the immune system in a couple of layers. And so today, we're not really going to talk a ton about the non-specific layers of immunity, but those are things that you could probably think of. So this would be things like our skin. If your skin is intact, it's very hard for bacteria or viruses to go through your skin because of the way skin's made. If your skin has a cut in it or a burn or something, it's very easy for the bacteria or viruses to get in. So skin is something. Our mucous membranes inside of our mouth, nose, ear, nose, and throat areas, stomach, GI tract, genitourinary tract, etc. Anywhere there is mucous membranes, it's like skin, only it is set up differently, which is why it is pink in color, reddish pink in color. And so the outside of it is a little less of a barrier. Now, in mucous membranes, where we don't have this outer, what we call the keratinized skin, which makes whatever the color your skin is set up by the melanocytes that are in there, and then the keratinized layer of your skin. So what you're really looking at here with your skin is dead skin cells that have worked their way up. That's the outer layer. Mucous membranes have a pinkish red color to them because they don't have that layer, that keratinized layer. So you think, well, it might be easier for bugs to get in. So if I have the bug here, not a big deal. I put the bug in my mouth, maybe a big deal. True, maybe a big deal. Your mucous membranes, though, have something that the outside skin don't have, and that is certain types of enzymes that can eat up certain bugs. Also, there is an immune protein, immunoglobulins, specifically immunoglobulin A, like alpha, and that is coating all of your mucous membranes, so that's there. But it is still possible to get things through the mucous membranes. Then there are other non-specific things that go on, such as certain types of cells that don't really care who the invader is. They're non-specific in that respect, but they will kill it. And these become the bridge between the non-specific immunity and then the stuff we want to talk about today, which is the specific immunity. So the bridge cells are often called antigen presenting cells. So these are, you've maybe heard of macrophages, the eating cells, that go out and they eat, an invader or something. Well, an antigen presenting cell is of a class of cells, like, say, macrophages, etc., who often, say, with a bacteria, will, eat the bacteria, and they'll take a piece of the bacteria and present it on the outside. Now, why would they do that? That's called antigen presentation. Now, if it's viral, it's a little bit different machinery, but same idea. Antigen presentation on the outside, then the non-specific cell goes down to the specific immune tissues and presents it usually to the T cell family first, T like Tom, and the antigen presentation then goes and triggers the T cells to be formed in a way where they imprint on that antigen that's being presented. So they make killer T cells, which literally will see whatever this is that's being represented and kill it. Then they make helper T cells, and then they make memory T cells, all against this one thing. So when you have T cell response, you have a direct killing response against the bad guy. You have helper T cells to regulate the T cell response and also go tell B cells, we'll talk about in a minute, to get busy. And then you have memory T cells, which will come around later, And if this bug ever comes in again, the memory T cells will be activated. They'll reanimate into differentiating into killer T cells, and they'll go kill this guy. So that's one of the reasons why if you've had certain infections before, you're less likely to get it in the future, these memory cells. Now, I said that the helper T cell families will go tell the B cells to turn on and do their B cell thing. Well, the B cells get activated by antigen presentation a little bit after T cells, usually, not always. And so it's sort of T cell, then B cell. But the B cells go on, and they don't make killer cells. They make binding things. So they make antibodies. So we hear a lot about, antibodies to this, that, and the other thing. You might get a blood test for antibodies against something, see if you've had it before. Well, the antibodies come from the B cells, and in the old days we called this the humoral immune system. Now it's just called the antibody immune system because that's a lot more descriptive. But it's basically immune proteins. And a lot of antibodies, although some can be very complex, look kind of like the letter Y. And so there's these little forked things that have receptor sites on them that are specific, again, to the bad guy, and they'll bind on to the bad guy. Now, why is that important? Because when you bind on to the bad guy, you can create an immune response simply from antigen-antibody binding. So that's really important. The other thing is that sort of tags the bad guy and other bad things that can happen to the bad guy. And then there are some antibody binding activities that actually inactivate the bad guys. So both the T and the B cell families become very important as we are fighting. And so in the B cell families, we have the direct antibody producing B cells that make the immunoglobulins. So this would be IG for short. And you'll see IG and then big G, that's immunoglobulin G. That's the one we have most of. That's our memory immunoglobulin. You got immunoglobulin A, IG big A, and that's the one in the mucous membranes all over the body, primarily. It's in your blood too, but it's mostly for mucous membranes. Then you've got IgM, like Mike, a big M, and that one is more of an acute response. So if you have a lot of IgM to something, usually you're fighting it right now. And then there's others like IgE, which is usually associated with allergies or parasites and worms and stuff. And then there's IgD, and there's some other iterations of immunoglobulins. But the important part is that when we have antigen presentation, if our immune system works correctly, we do T cells to make cytotoxic or killer T cells. We do B cells to make antibodies. But while we're doing that, we make memory T and B cells. They stick around then for sometimes a very long time. And they are the reason that we do not get usually infections that we have had before. Now, people often at this point will say, well, what about, I got a cold last year and I got a cold this year, didn't seem to help me out. Well, with viruses, especially as they mutate, you can have the same family of virus, but a different actual virus with a common cold or even influenza that comes around the next year. This is why, like with coronavirus, with COVID, they're watching, genomically, they're watching the genetic drift and the mutation rate with this type of infection. Now, in some cases, if it's just a little mutated, your immune system will still have pretty good memory. The bad viruses that we get, so you take an example of influenza, you get these specific influenza that leave the human population, such as the avian flu or the swine flu, things like that. And they go out and they leave humans and they go into an animal population. They get a gain of function from the animals, meaning what they do to the animals is different than what they do to people. So then the virus mutates in the animal population, and when it comes back to people, it's more pathogenic. We can get it again. Now, in laboratories, you can design viruses with gain of function as well. You can read a lot about that, I'm sure, online, but that is something that has been done, in theoretical, biowarfare and other types of things that go on in the world. But most gain of function is part of the virus, and then it's accentuated when the virus mutates in a host population, which, as I said, if it's usually a better mutation as far as the virus goes, not for people. if it leaves people, goes to an animal population, mutates in the animals, comes back as the new and improved version of, say, the swine flu or the avian flu. So those are just important things to consider. Now, the ability of your native immune system through the nonspecific and specific branches to operate has a lot to do with your general health, your overall immune reserve. Are you on medications that slow your immune system down or sideline your immune system? Do you have any diseases that will throw off your immune system? Say, sometimes autoimmunity will do this. Sometimes people say with HIV this will happen. Many other infections that are chronic can also, alter the immunity. So sometimes this way that it normally works from non-specific to specific immunity is still there inside of you, but if you're on, say, certain immune suppressive drugs, it might not work very well. This is why you always want to work with your healthcare providers, especially if you have underlying conditions that make your immune system maybe less responsive or slower, because you may need to do other prophylactic or precautionary things that maybe someone with robust immunity wouldn't. And that's not because it's nothing personal about you. It's because you just are in a position where you could get things more easily, and your immune system might be slower to respond than the next person. And so a lot of times your physician, the healthcare team may say, with what you've got going on, the medications you're on, we want you to take extra precautions. And we certainly see this in our population of people who are undergoing, chemotherapy and other cancer treatments where they have immunomodulatory problems due to the cancer treatment. So we have to be more careful with people like that, people with certain chronic infections, people with bad, flared up autoimmunity. All of those, kind of take the regular immune system and make it maybe not quite as effective. So if you're wondering why, maybe your doctor's always cautioned you about, if you get these symptoms, talk to me right away because of the medications you're on. That's often what's going on there. But generally speaking, for the bulk of humanity that isn't on immunosuppressive meds or has certain diseases, what I described today about your nonspecific immunity, then it presents the antigen to the specific immunity. Then you have T and B cell activity, then T and B cell memory. And if you ever see the bug again, the T and B cell memory cells reanimate and fight it off for you. All right. Well, as promised, that's the discussion of specific and nonspecific immunity. I'm Dr. A, and I'll see you all again soon.